Welcome to the Deep Dive. It's April 15, 2013, Patriots Day in Boston. The marathon is at its peak. It's a global event, televised everywhere. And then, in just a moment, two explosions near the finish line. Everything changes. What came next was this incredible 5-day stress test for the entire city, for its security, its medicine, its law enforcement.
And for this deep dive, we have a really essential stack of sources. We're leaning heavily on the official after-action reports, federal analyses, the critical self-assessments from the organizations that were on the ground. Our goal here isn't just to retell the story, it's to do a precise post-mortem on the response itself.
Absolutely. So our mission for you today is pretty clear. We want to isolate the most critical insights from all this.
Sure.
We're looking at what worked because of really careful planning, where coordination broke down in the moment, and what were the big actionable lessons learned.
And that's where you find the most valuable stuff, in that tension between amazing preparation and almost instantaneous failure on the ground. We're going to isolate those moments of foresight that you can point to and say, that saves lives, and then highlight the gaps that almost cost them.
Okay, so let's start with section 1, the foundation, the stuff that really did save lives. And the first deep dive nugget here is just the sheer power of anticipation. I mean, the Boston Marathon course is incredibly complex. It's a straight line, basically, that crosses 8 different jurisdictions.
Right. And our sources make it clear that coordinating that wasn't, some quick pre-race checklist. This was an annual thing. Multi-agency planning sessions that started every January.
And the real kicker, what's so fascinating, is that this planning always ended with a tabletop exercise, a simulation.
Exactly. And critically, the scenario they ran in 2012 was a mass casualty incident. They imagined a spectator grandstand collapsing right at the finish line.
Wait, so they had rehearsed a catastrophic event in that exact location just months before it happened for real?
They had. And the biggest benefit really wasn't the plan itself. It was the trust, the rapport that was built between the leaders from Boston PD, from EMS, from the Boston Athletic Association. When the bombs went off, that pre-existing trust meant the unified command could form and make decisions incredibly fast without all the usual friction. That social capital was, it was priceless.
And the trust is what enabled the medical response. They had what they called an all-hazards medical system already staged for the race.
Yep.
The Alpha Medical Tent, which was just yards from the blasts, it immediately became a triage area.
Boston EMS was just phenomenal. They used what they called a scoop-and-go approach, just get the most critical people out and to a hospital immediately. And a crucial finding in the sources is the use of tourniquets. Immediately. Aggressively. This was a big shift in civilian medicine, taken directly from battlefield lessons in Iraq and Afghanistan. They knew they had to stop the bleeding fast.
And the result of all of this, it's just staggering.
It is. Our sources confirm that every single critically injured patient who was transported from that scene to a hospital survived.
Every single one.
Every one. It's a testament to planning, to training, and to just individual heroism. But it wasn't just about speed. It was about managing the load on the system. We have to talk about CM80. That's the Central Medical Emergency Direction.
Yeah.
Think of them as the air traffic controller for trauma patients.
Air traffic controller for trauma. What does that mean in practice?
It means they were actively balancing where patients went. So instead of just flooding the closest hospital, CM80 was directing ambulances to different trauma centers across the region. Brigham and Women's got the most, but by spreading the load, they made sure no single hospital got overwhelmed. It prevented a total systemic collapse of the medical system.
That is an incredible story of success. But now, let's get into section 2, because even with that heroism, day 1 had some really critical gaps. Let's start with the CBRN communication failure.
Right. Chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear. And this is a textbook case of a technical success that became an operational failure. The Joint Hazard Assessment Teams, the JHATs, they were right there. By 2:54 p.m., minutes after the blast, they'd checked their air monitors and confirmed there was no chemical or radiological contamination. The all clear was immediate.
But the message didn't get out.
It stalled. That vital piece of information, non-contaminant status, was not relayed quickly or widely to the hospitals. So you have emergency rooms spending crucial time and resources trying to figure out if they needed to decontaminate patients, which slowed everything down. The tech worked, the communication failed.
And at the same time, responders on the ground are fighting against physical barriers. These interlocking metal bicycle racks.
The crowd control barriers. They were great for keeping spectators off the course, but they became a logistical nightmare. The victims were on the sidewalks behind these fences. First responders had to either climb over them with all their gear or waste precious time running down to find an opening. It was a physical design that impeded the rescue.
And while that's happening, hospitals are facing an information blockade because of IPA.
Right, the medical privacy laws. It's so hard for hospitals to tell frantic families where their loved ones are, especially if the patient is unconscious. In a mass casualty event, that problem is just magnified tenfold. It became this slow, complicated process with public health officials just to get information out legally.
All while law enforcement is trying to lock down the scene.
They moved fast. BPD set up an initial 15-block perimeter, which they later shrank to 12. And the most critical decision they made was to immediately hand investigative authority over to the FBI. That recognized the terrorism jurisdiction and streamlined the whole federal response. But even that was complicated by a false alarm fire at the JFK library that everyone initially feared was a secondary attack. It just shows you the chaos of that first day.
Which brings us to Section 3. This is where it goes from an investigation to a manhunt. And Thursday night, everything just escalates brutally.
The timeline is just jarring. At 10:31 p.m., MIT officer Sean Collier is shot and killed. Less than an hour later, a carjacking. And then the victim escapes and calls 911 just after midnight, with the chilling detail that his captors just told him they were the marathon bombers.
And that's the link. That connects everything and leads almost directly to the Watertown shootout at 12:44 a.m.
And in that shootout, you see both chaos and this incredible improvisation. Transit officer Richard Donahue was critically wounded. The EMTs on scene made a split-second call. They knew he wouldn't survive the longer trip to a major trauma center, so they took him to Mount Auburn, the closest hospital, even though it wasn't a trauma center. That decision, going in protocol, absolutely saved his life.
So after the shootout, the suspect escapes on foot and the Unified Command makes these huge decisions. They shut down the entire MBTA transit system and ask everyone in 6 jurisdictions to shelter in place. That's a city of millions basically put on lockdown.
It was a massive, massive disruption, but they felt it was necessary. You have an armed, desperate suspect on foot, and you have to keep him off the transit system and contained. But this next part, the manhunt, it exposed one of the biggest lessons from the whole event: the failure to manage mutual aid.
The sources say something like 2,500 law enforcement officers descended on Watertown. How does that become a problem?
It's a problem because a huge number of them just showed up. They self-deployed. There was no structure to integrate them. So you have thousands of officers, many who haven't been briefed, all on different radio channels who don't know the area.
It's not just chaos, it's actively dangerous.
Exactly. The lack of command led directly to dangerous situations, including friendly fire incidents. And not just at the very end, but throughout the day during the search. It was a failure of discipline, an influx of well-meaning people that just wasn't managed.
And all that chaos culminates in the final capture, late Friday, when the suspect is found in a boat.
Right. And the sources are very clinical about what happened next, and it's a critical lesson. An officer sees movement in the boat and fires a shot. And then other officers, believing they're being shot at by the suspect, they join in. It's what the report calls contagious fire. Dozens and dozens of rounds were fired. And the investigation later found that the suspect was unarmed at the time.
Let's shift now to Section 4, to the threat itself. The Tsarnaev brothers, they were quickly labeled as self-radicalized, homegrown violent extremists, or HVEs.
And the radicalization is complex, but it's a model cities have to understand now. It was rooted in extremist ideology, for sure, but it was also fueled by personal grievances, a sense of failure. Tamerlan, for example, his boxing career had failed. He was struggling to support his family. That sense of personal failure mixed with this ideology becomes a really powerful and violent fuel.
And the blueprint for how to do it was found online.
Yep. They got the instructions for the pressure cooker IEDs straight from Al-Qaeda's English language magazine, Inspire. It shows that you don't need to go to a training camp anymore. The radicalization, the bomb-making instructions, it's all just a digital download away.
And speaking of digital, there were intelligence warnings that were, in hindsight, either missed or maybe just underestimated.
The big one was from Russia. The Russian FSB warned both the FBI and the CIA back in 2011 about Tamerlan. They said he was becoming radicalized. They had intercepted calls. The FBI did interview him. They checked their databases, but they just didn't find enough to prioritize him highly in the federal intelligence system, tie-dye. The warning was there, but it didn't survive the bureaucratic process.
And then there's the dual reality of social media during the crisis. On one hand, it was essential for the investigation.
Absolutely essential. The FBI got over 33 terabytes of digital data photos, videos from the public, and it was invaluable in identifying the suspects.
But on the other hand,
Those same platforms spread misinformation at a terrifying speed. The report found that one false rumor about an 8-year-old girl running the marathon being killed, that rumor circulated on Twitter at a 44-to-1 ratio of misinformation to correction. Just think about managing a crisis when you're fighting that kind of information war.
and the worst of it was the misidentification of a missing student, Sunil Tripathi, as a suspect.
That was the so-called digital vigilantes on sites like Reddit. They became convinced it was him, and they convinced a lot of other people, too. The harm it caused his family was immense, and it forced the FBI's hand. They had to release the official photos of the real suspects, partly just to stop the damage from all that online speculation.
So looking at the long game, Section 5, let's talk about recovery and the policy lessons that came out of this.
Well, one big best practice was the restoration of Boylston Street. Boston's OEM handled it with incredible precision. They had a plan. Residents and businesses were back in the area within 18 hours of the FBI releasing the crime scene. The entire street was fully reopened in under 36 hours. That speed was critical for the city's recovery.
But the public information problems continued even after the manhunt was over.
Yes, this was the Joint Information Center, the JIC gap. A JIC is supposed to be the one single source of truth in a crisis. While the Unified Command was active, they handled press conferences as well. But once it stood down, you had different agencies pushing out uncoordinated, sometimes conflicting information on social media. It created a lot of confusion.
We also saw some real bureaucratic problems in the financial aftermath, especially for the hospital.
We did. The hospitals had huge costs from the surge, canceling surgeries, paying overtime for staff who were locked down. And initially, FEMA denied their requests for reimbursement for those specific medical surge costs. Their policy just didn't cover it. The hospitals were basically being penalized for being so prepared.
That seems completely backward.
It was, and that policy was eventually changed in February 2014 to recognize those costs. But it showed a real lag in the bureaucracy's ability to support what's needed in a modern disaster response.
And finally, the reports really highlight the psychological toll, and that it went way beyond just the victims and the police.
This is so important. The reports identified a critical need for mental health support for everyone involved. That includes the healthcare workers, the city employees who clean the sites, the human services staff. These people were exposed to profound trauma, but often they didn't have access to the same level of mental health resources as first responders.
Okay, so let's try to summarize this deep dive for you, our listener. We've seen, on one hand, the absolute best of foresight, years of planning, a simulated disaster, and a medical response that was, frankly, flawless. They saved every single critical patient they transported.
But then you have these critical real-time failures. Uncontrolled mutual aid that led to friendly fire. A vital all-clear message that never reached the hospitals that needed it most.
And running through all of it is this new reality of the digital world. The bombings forced this fusion of old-school physical security perimeters, triage with completely modern digital information management, crowdsourced evidence, social media chaos.
And that tension leads us to the final provocative question for you to think about. As these threats become more homegrown, and as our public life becomes more and more digitized, how does a city achieve the speed and transparency it needs for public safety, without also compromising the integrity of an investigation or even the fundamental privacy of its citizens? That's a balance cities everywhere are still trying to figure out.